What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be making a Minecraft furnace that can cook food and melt metal. I started this project over a year ago and I'm super excited to share this with you guys, but before we jump into the build, let's go over how this idea came to be. So the YouTube channel I Like to Make Stuff has the Maker Alliance for their Patreon members. This gives you access to their Discord, which is full of other makers coming from all different backgrounds and skill sets. That Discord server is one of the coolest things I've gotten to be a part of. There's so many great people there and cool events that they're planning. Honestly, if you're a maker at all, I would highly recommend checking that out. Now, one of the guys inside of the Maker Alliance had this group project idea, and the whole purpose around it was to try out a new skill. And I wanted mine to be melting metal. So I started to look into which furnace I wanted to buy. Then I had one of those, what would be cool ideas that you almost hate to get because that's the only thing that you can do now, and that was to make a Minecraft furnace that can melt the metal instead of buying one. And if I was going to go that far, it might as well have a grill in front of it so it can cook food, so it can function just the way that it does in the game. So instead of buying a furnace, I now bought a welder to put this all together. The only thing I actually knew how to do at the start of this project was to install the 240 volt outlet for the welder, which meant I was going to need a lot of help. Luckily, my friends Ashley and Phil and my cousin Philip teamed up with me to put this all together. The first thing to tackle was seeing if we can get that pixelated Minecraft look while also being heat resistant. So I bought some cheap 12x12 tiles and cut them into 1-inch strips. Then I used a 3D printed jig to cut them into squares. After I had enough tiles to test a pattern, I spray painted them with different shades of gray I could find in rattle cans. However, I wasn't too happy with how the colors came out, and also realized the amount of time it was going to take me to cut out all these tiles. So I figured I was going to need another approach. I ended up buying pre-cut mosaic tiles that were already 1-inch squares and hit them with some primer. Also, instead of using gray spray cans, I switched to getting small paint samples from Home Depot to give me a bigger range of color options. I just had to make sure to water them down so they can spray out of my HVLP gun. After all the paint dried, I could cut all the webbing holding the tiles together. My friend Ashley is the one who actually lays out all the tiles to give it that pixelated look, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Next was to weld the frame together. I did load up on tools for this project like the metal chop saw and a welding table, which helped me a lot to be as accurate as possible. Now the furnace is a 26-inch cube with nothing but steel, tiles, and cement, which are all very heavy materials. So we decided to add feet on the front and casters on the back, that way you can tilt this thing on its side and roll it around. One thing I did notice while editing this video is that for some reason when I go to look at something I just did, I make the most scrunched up face and it's like a look of disgust. I don't know why I'm doing this or why I'm looking at things this way, but whenever I found it, I made sure I left it in there. After the frame was done, I could start adding all the sheet metal and start sectioning off the grill area. This is where I made my first big mistake. I should have just tacked the sheet metal on the frame in a few different spots, but instead I went around the whole perimeter, which did not need to be done, and it ended up creating so much heat that it warped both the bottom and then the spot for the grill area. Now this doesn't matter because it's all going to be on the inside of the furnace, but this was a good lesson to learn early on. I wanted to darken up the inside of the grill area, but using a high temp spray paint wouldn't be good since this is where the food was going to be. So instead we heated the metal with a torch and applied vegetable oil to give that dark finish that can still be food safe. And this whole process is called hot blowing. Once that was done, I can go ahead and put the rest of the sheet metal on the sides of the furnace to close it in. Unlike the front, I didn't have a good way to clamp the metal together, so I put a piece of scrap wood against the sheet metal and flipped the furnace on top of it, that way the weight can hold it down and I could weld the two pieces together. This worked really well. I just had to be careful not to over weld and add too much heat to the metal and bow it like I did last time. I also built up the bottom of the furnace, that way I can cut down on the amount of refractory cement I needed, which is going to help keep the weight down. The plan for the lid wasn't actually designed until about halfway through the project, but once it was, we were to cut out the back and that would give us clearance to be able to slide it back and forth. Then it was finally time to start pouring the refractory cement. I used fire bricks in the center where the crucible was going to sit and K-wool on the sides. Next was to mix up the cement and pour in the bottom layer. I also just want to point out again that I really have no idea what I'm doing, especially when it comes to welding or pouring cement. It's all just learning as I go and watching other YouTube videos to kind of help me along with this process. Another channel, Black Bear Productions, actually makes his own furnace video, and I referenced that a lot while making mine, and that really helped with the inside and how I wanted that to look. So I'll leave a link to that video down below. Once the first pour was dried, I can start to prep the next one. I added some metal up top, that way the drawer slides had something to screw onto, and I also drilled out holes for the burners. Then I used a sonotube to pour around and 3D printed parts to take the place of the burners, that way I wouldn't have to drill out holes in the cement and I can just remove them after it hardens. Then it was time for the second pour. This took about 3 50-pound bags of cement, so you can imagine how heavy this thing started to become. Thankfully, Phil was here for most of the cement pours. It was great to have another set of hands for this, and without him, I probably would have mixed the cement wrong. We used a scrap piece of wood to try and jam down the cement so there wasn't any voids or not filled areas, and then tried to smooth out the top the best we could so the lid could slide against it. Once it was all dry, I was able to remove the sonotube, and to my surprise, everything worked out great. I used this strong steel enforced epoxy to hold down the sheet metal in places I wasn't going to be able to weld it to the frame. Then put together the rest of the lid that was going to slide out to reveal the crucible. I did this in 2 pours, that way it gave me some extra clearance above the crucible for heat to properly go around it. Or at least that's what I thought I was supposed to do from the research I was able to gather. I also added rebar this time to strengthen the cement and stop it from just falling out once it got flipped over. Once that was done, I could add the drawer slides that should be plenty far away from the fire to work properly, and also weld on the handle so you can tilt the furnace and roll it wherever I needed to. Then my cousin Philip put together the parts that were going to hold the propane burners in place. Meanwhile, during this whole project, Ashley had been working on laying out all the tiles to get that pixelated pattern. I'm glad we went this route instead of doing a more real-life look. This keeps it truer to the game, and I couldn't have been happier in how it turned out. Now all I had to do was paint the furnace and glue on all the tiles. And with that, I was ready to fire it up for the first time. While lighting the burners, the flame rose up a lot more than expected and actually burnt some of my arm hair off. I imagine this is the kind of stuff my parents are telling me about, like don't burn the house down while we're away, and I neglected to tell them about this when it first happened, so when they watch this for the first time, I don't think they're going to be too happy with me. Although I think I'd rather have my eyebrows burn off than deal with all the problems I was about to encounter next. After having the furnace run for a bit, I ran into some issues with the lid. The sheet metal bowed from the heat escaping through the vent, causing the adhesive for the tiles to detach in certain spots. On top of that, it totally cooked any tiny bit of plastic and rubber for the drawer slides, making it unusable. Honestly, I should have seen that one coming. Sadly, now it was time to remove all the tiles and see how I was going to fix everything. After thinking it over, I had a plan that I felt good about. I was going to heat up the top of the lid to reflatten it, and then drive a bunch of anchors through the sheet metal to the cement, stopping it from ever wanting to bow up again. Once I thought I got enough heat on there, I went for a very careful approach to flatten it out. When I realized that didn't work, I moved on to more accurate and precise tools to get the job done, which also was unsuccessful. At a last attempt effort, I figured maybe my awful face of disgust might make the problem go away, but it didn't. I had now botched the metal so bad to the point where I couldn't fix it. Instead of moving forward, I now had to take off the piece of sheet metal, which also meant breaking away all the refractory cement and going way far backwards than I wanted to. Alright, time for a new plan.
One that I call Operation Cannot Possibly Fail a Second Time.
I welded on a new piece of sheet metal, but this time I added a bunch of rebar, that way once I pour the refractory cement, it should hold the metal in place and stop it from bowing. I also went ahead and added some thicker steel around the vent in hopes to keep heat away from the tiles so they don't get messed up again. And with that, we're all back together. I just used some C-channel in place for the drawer slide, but I did need to make this little piece of metal to stop the lid from accidentally sliding off when you pulled it back. Now, the only thing I needed to do was make a set of tongs to lift out and pour the crucible. Thankfully, my buddy Jason, who does blacksmithing and knife making, came over to give me a hand. I ended up taking the curved pieces off of an old pair we made. That way it saved us from having to forge them out again, and I could just weld them on to our new pair. Now that I had a set of working tongs, it was time to roll the furnace outside for another test. I also invited everyone over to test out the grill, even though I don't really know how to grill food myself, which was a problem. Thankfully, my brother-in-law Josh was there to save the day and stop me from serving everyone a bunch of unseasoned meat. Josh made us a 3-course meal consisting of pork chops, steak, and chicken, which are all meats that you'd be able to find inside the game.
Cool.
Alright, guys.
Alright, so
Alright. Hopefully it's not poison.
it seems cooked.
We are cooked.
Doesn't look like anything fell into it.
That should be good. You guys see any metal shavings from like the grinder?
Oh, it looks real pretty.
Oh, that's perfect.
Oh, that's so cute.
Fat seasoning now.
I can't believe this actually functions as well as it does as a grill.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool.
Not as bad as I thought it was gonna be.
No, I thought this was going to be god awful.
Gee, thanks.
Don't be
I'm
honest.
saying.
Really don't be honest.
The grill really exceeded all of our expectations and worked great. However, Josh did say a tray in the front or something to block the wood from wanting to fall out would have been helpful. He also said not to invite people over for a barbecue if I don't know how to cook food for myself, and I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Once everyone's bellies were full, we moved on to testing the furnace part. So far, everything was going to plan and the copper actually started to melt. However, halfway through, we noticed the lid was jammed shut and we couldn't open it. We think the heat caused the metal to swell up, making my track too tight to be able to slide out. Sadly, the test was a failure and now it was left with a crucible filled with copper and a busted up furnace. Making the lid, take 3. And just like that, we're ready for another test. So instead of a sliding lid, we now have one that lifts straight out. This wasn't as convenient and also requires 2 people to operate, but I was willing to sacrifice that in hopes to finally get a win at this point. After about 30 minutes, everything was looking good, even though some of the glue started to melt and rise up, but at this point that was the least of my worries. Right around the 1 hour mark, we could see that all the copper had actually melted and the burners were actually forcing it to swirl inside of the crucible. Once we saw that, we knew it was time to see if we could finally pour this into our mold. Besides me buying the wrong type of cupcake trays that almost burned through to the concrete, everything worked out great, and we were all super pumped to see this thing finally work after starting this project over a year ago. Now, there is a quick way to cool the copper down using ice, which I do attempt.
Oh, this should be good.
This is super dry. That's not what I wanted. This is such a fumble.
This is why we can have
Why
like.
is it count? Why are you filming me right now?
I don't want my picture taken right now!
Although very clumsy and disorganized, it did work, and now I have a super cool copper ingot just like you can get inside the game. And with some sanding and polishing, I was able to get this thing to a mirror finish. I also went ahead and melted some aluminum as well. So after putting the furnace through 2 grilling sessions and 2 metal pours, this guy was definitely looking a bit burnt and scuffed up. Although the paint and the finish didn't exactly hold up like I was hoping for, and this project being far from perfect, I'm still very proud on how it turned out. We achieved the 2 main things that we set out to do, and seriously, big thanks to all my friends who helped out with this project. I could not have done it without you guys. That about wraps it up for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be sure to...
Hey, Mare, you hungry? Freaking guys always drinking down here. There, dinner's ready. You're next.